thank you. Hello. Yes, my name is Jessica Tran. I am from Montreal. I'm currently a student studying computer science and physics. And today I'm going to talk to you about my anxiety and self-monitoring through technology. So I want to preface this by saying that me and my anxiety are not friends, in the very least. To get a sense of our relationship, imagine you have an ex and you guys aren't on good terms, but you share a lot of the same friends, so you end up at the same social gatherings. As much as you want to avoid it or avoid them, to have fun, you can't. So that's sort of a metaphor for my anxiety, and it's for most people's. Biologically, my heart begins to race, my palms get sweaty, my brain starts slowing down all processes. And in fact, this is not special at all. It's a universal symptom if you have a healthy brain and body. So to get a longitudinal sense of how long I've been dealing with anxiety, let's address my biggest childhood fear. This is a big therapy talk for all of us. One of my biggest fears was that I might forget how to breathe. And this sounds really, really dumb, but I was like 5 or 7 or 9 or some odd number. I would spend hours concentrating really hard on my breathing just in case the little guy in my head would forget to pull the lever. And you all thought about this guy when you were young. But of course, I eventually learned that breathing is an automatic physiological function, as I hope all of you have. It lies in the same domain as blinking, hunger, exhaustion. It's just a way that our body automatically regulates so that cognitive resources can be spent towards higher thinking, problem solving. Nonetheless, even at my ripe old age of 23, I still worry about my breath and over-intellectualize it, to the point it becomes really irregular. And that's, again, very natural. Like if I were to ask you right now to pay attention to your breath, you would also probably get into an arrhythm. So we can try it out. Please pay attention to your breath. Are you inhaling? What about exhaling? Are you on tempo? Did you remember to inhale? Okay, so that was a dumb exercise, but now imagine me doing that to you constantly, all the time, at any moment. That's what my anxiety is like. And this is my life. But I really, really love to problem solve, which is one of my greatest strengths. And I tried to address this problem in the best way I know how, which is through a mix of psychology, philosophy, and JavaScript. So starting with psychology, there's some studies that show a correlation between breath and mood. Basically, when you're in a heightened state, like fear or anxiety, your breath rate is going to quicken. And studies have showed in more recent years that this is a bidirectional mechanism, meaning while a mood can change your rate of breath can also change your mood, which is really, really cool. But we'll get more into that a bit later. So qualitatively, I wanted to parse out the distinctions of my mood. So I just wrote out things of when I'm anxious and when I'm happy. And about last year, late last year, my anxiety was getting really difficult to manage. I had moved to a new city, I wasn't fitting in, school wasn't going too great, my bills were surmounting, rains and pours, et cetera, et cetera. A few strands of stress I can deal with, like most people, but eventually it compounded and got in the way of like simple functions, like eating, sleeping, being able to leave my house, and ultimately being productive. And it blocked all these things, these small things that made me happy, and led to a depression, which is what I like to call the anxiety-depression cycle. You can't do the things that you feel you ought to be doing, therefore you feel bad, and then you get sad. 2 points I want to address real quick. This is one of the hardest parts about dealing with mental health, and one of the factors I really try to address in this experiment. Secondly, I don't want to simplify mental health. I recognize there are a ton of intersectional biological, environmental, and sociological forces that harm and continue to harm people. I myself am affected by some factors. Nonetheless, I carved out this particular aspect because it was the easiest to delineate and target. Because I'm a person who really likes to take things apart to put them back together, I figured this was the right way to start, and my next step was to figure out the mechanism behind this and what it means to be productive. So that brings us to Foucault's panopticon. So if you don't know what the panopticon is, or if you do know what the panopticon is, and you haven't read Discipline and Punish by Michael Foucault, you probably have the idea wrong. Which I only point out, not to be a dick, but just because I had it wrong a few months myself before I was graciously pointed out to me that it was not correct, unlike the way that I'm doing now. So there's a common misconception with the panopticon that's presented through mainstream media that makes it an analogy towards the surveillance society. I'm sure you've seen all the sensational articles of this is what's going on, the government's watching you, this is the panopticon. And one of the great analogies is Sauron from the Lord of the Rings. While most of these analogies do mesh very well with the original idea, it has this quality that humans do in which we attribute characteristics such as villainy, evilness, which I want to very much frame right now that is not the case. And Foucault himself, in the very beginning of his novel, writes that we should not view power and surveillance as a negative thing. In fact, it was first introduced as a humane way to maintain social order, as opposed to public torture and violence. And while now it's arguably invisible and still violent, if we should view it as a neutral and malleable mechanism, we can use it for our own positive production of reality. So here's my very quick crash course on panopticonism. The panopticon is named after Jeremy Bentham's architectural proposal of the ideal prison. So it's a cylindrical structure, which is a prison, and around the cells, we have open face cells. And in the very center, we have a guard, just one single guard in this tower. It's protected by trick glass, so the guard can see out, but the prisoners cannot see in. In this mechanism, this is the most ideal and efficient usage of power, because this possibility of always being watched will imbue the prisoner with an anxiousness to behave well, which should, by the power of the panopticon, lead to the development of our own self-monitoring for good behavior. The panopticon is polyvalent, means that the guard could be changed for anybody. Your school teacher, your parents, your sibling, your friend, that guy on Twitter, anyone. And it would still function without interruption. Each node in this network can be swapped out and replaced at any given time, which is what makes it so pervasive and powerful. With the perception that everyone or anyone could be watching you, you must fulfill your social contract, and the panopticon rests on this power of observation to form good habits. So by definition, Foucault's panopticon is just a way to enforce a specific behavior. And it can take many forms. So for example, schools, hospitals, prisons, the new language of listicles, 10 ways to make yourself more productive, social networks, etc. It sounds a little scary, but it's not. It's actually meant to condition oneself for self-discipline. So using this and combining it with Pavlov's dog, which I'm sure all of you know the classical conditioning mechanism. It's just the saliva and the trigger and the response. You have a really good recipe to improve one's life. And combining this with heart rate variability, it's a very nice slide. I created an app. Anyways, so the panopticon itself is just an amplifier for things that already exist. It's not scary. It's more like, not so much like Sauron, but more so like the Cerebro from X-Men. And so in the wrong hands, it can be very destructive and exploitative, but it can be also being used for good, which is what we're going to do. So to get into the technical stuff, heart rate variability, what is it? So when you inhale, your heart rate increases, and while you exhale, your heart rate decreases. And if you plot this on a time function, you get a really nice line, and it's very distinct. And just an FYI, the y-axis is your inner beat interval, which is the time in between each beats. And this is not to be mistaken for BPM, which is beats per minute, and it's just an approximation. So one of the reasons why I got started with this project was A, my anxiety got pretty bad. B, I was actually doing a internship through Node with Outreachy, and we were working on Node serial port. So I wanted to do a fun little project to figure out how this code base worked at all. And I settled on something that was beneficial for me. I wanted to do a live demo, but my pulse sensor didn't work really well. So in short, what I did was I just used Node serial port, a bunch of NPM Node packages, and I designed this just little heart rate monitor on my CLI and read in my heart rate. So I'm sorry if you can't see that line really well, but this is me breathing at a resting heart rate. So this is just me not doing anything at all. And you can kind of see naturally, as we know, as you breathe in and exhale, your heart rate goes up and down. You plot that, it's going to go up and down. But it's not very predictable, and there's no way to really put this into an equation. However, if you breathe really deeply and regularly, you can create these really beautiful sinusoidal wave lines. And this increase of amplitude and this consistency of the graph is sort of the heart of this project. And this is called heart rate variability. As you can see, the amplitude is a lot higher than what it was before. And studies show that the greater your heart rate variability, the better your physiological health, which leads to your better psychological well-being. And that includes depression, stress management, anxiety management, cardiac health. So this is just a video of me, doing some breathing exercises as you can see here, the metronome. This is 12 beats per minute, or also 6 cycles per minute, which is what is called a resonance frequency. Resonance frequency is basically just the most efficient rate that you can breathe to really flex your breathing systems, also known as your autonomic nervous system. So this is just a simple graph. You can determine your resonance frequency by just going through different cycles. So you can breathe at 4 cycles per minute, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6. And as you can see on this plot line, 6 is the highest. It just dips right before 5.5. Just a really beautiful, beautiful graph. And so the best amplitude is your greatest HRV. For most people, it is 6 cycles per minute, or 0.1 hertz if you throw it through a Laplace function. And even if you're at 5.5 or 6.5, you could still do around 6 and still get the same results. So what can we do with this? We can basically just exercise our breathing mechanism to really flex our ANS, or automatic nervous system. If you do this, this has been done multiple times through a lot of different studies, through different groups, at healthy function athletes to depressed individuals. You do this resonance frequency breathing 20 minutes a day, maybe 40 minutes a day, with some intermittent biofeedback training. And it can improve your mood regulation, your anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. Very, very cool. But one of the biggest and most important factors I find is that through this training, the effects are chronic and persistent. So say you do this for a few weeks, you stop, the effects will be long-lasting. I'm not too sure what the decay is. That hasn't been studied, but it still works even if you're not doing these breathing exercises, which I find really cool. So this is just your regimen. 20 minutes of resonance breathing daily, some weekly relaxed breathing, which is just you watch the visual graph of your IBI coming in, the one that I showed earlier, and you just inhale as the line is coming up, and when it reaches the crest, you just exhale, and that's relaxed breathing. And you do that very regularly, and this trains your ANS. And so I tried to couple this with a monitoring system by setting this up with a Bluetooth Arduino to calculate my average rolling heart rate, which worked really well just by integrating values for resting heart rate and resonance training, but it was really, really hard to calculate in real world scenarios. The reason being, as your breath quickens, the variance of your heart rate actually begins to plateau from lack of variability. So it becomes very algorithmically very hard to determine your breath cycles per minute without a huge margin of error. One accurate way to measure this is to have been purchased a respiration device that connected to your chest or to your nose, but I didn't. So instead, I used the principles of the Panopticon because, of course, it's polyvalent. It can be used in any way, and I designed this experiment. To get my controls, I would do specific things to exasperate my anxiety, like just very typical psychological things, like pinch myself, post things online that I really wouldn't normally do, things that that make me nervous inherently. So here's a few examples. This is just a recreation that I did, but I did do things like this, was just message people that I liked and measured in my heart rate. This didn't go anywhere, just so you guys know. And so I also tried to program, or I did program my own Panopticon, meaning, well, it was more so what you could call yet another productivity tool. So remember, the Panopticon does not necessitate constant observation. It's merely perceived constant observation. So again, leveraging my social anxiety, I used a bunch of NPM packages to program a cron job to check if I was doing my daily logs. And I prescribed a set of punishments for myself if I didn't do it by a certain amount of time. So my first tier was I wrote out all these things to send myself that when you're not doing the things that you're doing, you're really angry and you're saying to yourself, I would just call myself awful human being, which wasn't very nice, but that was the punishment. I would send out inane tweets to Twitterland, although I recognize this is just how Twitter is, so it wasn't really a punishment. Tier 3, I had a bunch of embarrassing things to send to crushes or exes, And thankfully I never reached here, but that would have been pretty much the worst for many reasons. So ultimately the experiment was a redundancy of a lot of different methods. So I used the exercise that have been tested to shown improvements of mood regulation. I experimented with my anxiety coming in and measured it, which was a form of exposure therapy or rejection therapy. I built this accountability mechanism to watch over me, or my own personal Panopticon. And also the act of writing down those thoughts that I had was a bit therapeutic. So I guess the question here is, was it successful? I did go from a 24 resting heart rate, or 24 breaths per minute to 22, but I don't know if that's really important to note, but essentially part of the experiment. I self-observed that I have an improved control of my thoughts and ruminated a lot less. I feel that I can distinguish when I'm getting anxious or am in a state of anxiety, and instead of using self-coping mechanisms that didn't really solve the problem, I just employed this breathing technique, which is what I was doing before this talk, actually. And a bit of less social anxiety, and ultimately improved my feelings of efficacy across all areas. I want to note, though, that before you try this at home, and if you do plan to, there are some really important factors that could have contributed to all these positive effects, which was, so I got used to the new city. I built some meaningful relationships. I began therapy for the first time. I exercised, and I decreased a lot of my stressors from school and work ending. So again, with mental health, it's hard to parse through and figure out which factors are the main ones, and what has the alchemy to improve. So in conclusion, I wanted to wrap this up meaningfully, but I didn't want to end up saying something like, me and my anxiety are now best pals, because I feel like that's a false optimism and frankly just not true. If I could choose a physiology in which I didn't experience debilitating anxiety, I didn't have to think about it this hard and didn't have to do so many things to manage it, 10 times out of 10, no question, I would definitely choose that body. But nonetheless, this is just who I am. And so what I have in closing for you instead is this clip from Star Trek, because I feel like that show just says things that I wish I could say all the time and says it so much better. And if you're unfamiliar with the show, all you need to know, well, first, familiarize yourself, and all you need to know about this is that it features Data, an android, who's like perfect in every way except that he's not human. And in this particular clip, he is speaking to his android daughter, who also shares this flaw. All right, and that's the end of my talk. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much.